Hello, Wonder. Tonight, I'll take you to the shores of a people who navigated not with sight, but with intuition. There will be no maps before us, no engines humming behind, only the wooden body of a canoe, the echo of paddles kissing the water, and stars slowly shifting above. Once, direction was drawn by the setting of a star, and time was measured by how a wave broke. A child could close their eyes and tell which island they were nearing just by the wind, because the sky was fixed, but the compass inside a person never stayed still. Tonight, we'll listen to a story that begins with the rhythm of paddles. At one point, an unseen light will appear, that strange current they call Te Lapa. Later, a song, not just one we'll hear, but one that remembers for us. And near dawn, a silhouette, a bird's call, and perhaps a memory of a place we've never been, but always known. So now, dim your light, gently place your headphones, and if you can, sit by an open window. As the wind carries the night, we'll drift with it. If these quiet journeys bring you comfort, and if stories like this soothe your night, you might consider subscribing. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Leave a note in the comments. And maybe the next story. We'll begin with the breeze from where you are. Now, be still. We begin with the sound of paddles. But where we arrive, words will no longer be needed. You might not expect that the hush between two heartbeat strokes of the paddle could reveal quite so much about ancient astronomy, but it does. And it does so without ever raising its voice. Listen instead to the oars. Their cedar blades slipping into night breeze water with the soft resignation of pages turning in a book you've already read. Each dip and lift repeats the same small joke about gravity and trust. The ocean pretends to hold still. The canoe pretends to push it aside, and both parties know they'll try again in 3 seconds. Voyaging priests once counted these strokes in clusters of 49. Claiming that number matched the breaths between moonrise and the first faint blink of Arcturus. The kind of detail handy only if your destination lies 1,000 miles. That way, and every paddle whisper carries the rumor of distance. An apprentice paddler recorded that on windless nights the blade sounded like damp cloth smoothing a table. A comparison so absurdly domestic that it has survived a dozen generations of retelling. Mostly because no one has thought of anything sleepier. Above, stars mow about like polite guests waiting for a kava bowl. Below, phosphorescent plankton sketch brief glow dots at the hull. Tiny footnotes assuring us the text of oceanic darkness is indeed still being edited dot the canoes. Steersman nods toward a ribbon of water so subtle you might mistake it for the ocean's own sigh. Islanders call this ribbon Te Lapa, a faint electric flicker that runs along certain currents, visible only at just before moonset when even the stars seem to dim their chatter. Elders say it looks like lightning learning table manners. Navigators follow its pulse the way commuters follow a soft chorus of brake lights, no hurry, just quiet confirmation of direction. A 1960s field researcher tried filming Te Lapa with 16mm stock, and later apologized to his funding board that the footage resembled a nervous flashlight in a laundry sink. Polynesian captains were amused. They already knew you can't upstage a ribbon that prefers to keep secrets. Steering by that hush of light demands neither sextant nor radio. Only the promise that salt on your lashes will taste the same tomorrow as it does tonight, a flavor charted long before spreadsheets arrived. Some modern yachtsmen attempt to find Te Lapa using phone cameras, but pixels wobble where eyelids excel. One micro hook for the insomniac. A New Zealand tourist once insisted he saw the ribbon while his guide napped, though the guide swears there was only moonlit reef and the faint glow of wishful thinking. Either way, the canoe resumes its hush-splash cadence, and the ribbon continues drawing its understated calligraphy across the swell. Mid-voyage, with constellations wheeling overhead like a ceiling fan set to its slowest, The crew begins. The ancestor songs. They do not burst forth, they amble, clearing their throats politely in the key of half-remembered dawns. Lyrics inventory everything a canoe might dream about. Breadfruit ripening unnoticed. The legendary homeland Hawaii drifting somewhere between history and polite metaphor. And a canoe stout enough to carry both myth and taro corms without complaint. Verse 3 names 32 star paths, each pronounced in a syllable as soft as a blanket fold. Verse 4 repeats 7 shellfish jokes because even epics need snack breaks. Ethnomusicologists once tried counting tempo changes and gave up. Around the 97th, declaring the melody pleasantly pendulous. The crew just calls it staying awake. Some lines mention birds that haven't been seen since the last ice age. Yet singing them allegedly keeps the hull trim superstition, perhaps, but so are most bedtime rituals. A micro-hut passes by every so often, a navigator gently reminds his nephew that if you forget the joke about the parrotfish, the stars might hide behind clouds out of sheer embarrassment. Scholars write trenchant papers on mnemonic devices. Voyagers simply keep humming. Hours unspool into the thinnest thread of silver on the horizon, dawn rehearsing backstage. The paddles slow, almost shy, as if reluctant to disturb the nights. Final sentence. Then someone spots the silhouette of an island, low and unassuming, like a lazy comma breaking the ocean's long claws. No cheers erupt. Instead, a paddler mutters that the birds will handle announcements. Right on cue, a single seabird leaps overhead, its call resembling a tea kettle too polite to whistle. Shoreline trees, still more rumor than object, rustle with pre-breeze confidence. The canoe glides close enough that breakers can gossip about. Incoming company, and the hull answers with the dignified silence of travelers who've rehearsed this arrival for centuries. Before stepping onto sand, the steersman brushes his palm over the ferrule, smooth gunnel 5 palm widths long. One last measurement in a night full of nearly invisible metrics. Soon enough, fire smoke will mingle with salt, legends will. Shed their cosmic sizes to fit around breakfast, and somebody will joke that the journey felt shorter than the queue at customs. But now, in the hush between wave and footfall, navigation retires to its hammock. Continent oars kept rhythm, ribbons kept secrets, songs kept history, and dawn kept its appointment. If your eyes drift closed here, know that even the island yawns in welcome, letting its first bird notes feather into quiet, endless glide. You might not expect that the narrow pinch of an hourglass, the tiny throat where every grain must cue could summon guild edicts, seaside experiments involving oatmeal, and one brief panic about whether sand should be measured in teaspoons or in lullabies, yet here we are, drifting through the hushed chronicle of hourglass neck diameters. If you're still awake by the time a Genoese navigator swears the perfect aperture is just wide enough to let 12 thoughts pass in a minute, feel free to subscribe or simply let the sands keep trickling. They have never waited for accolades. A furnace glows quietly in a 14th century Venetian workshop, the kind of glow that seems to purr rather than burn. Glassblowers lean long iron pipes into the heat, gather honey blobs, and rotate them with a rhythm that would make a metronome blush. They shape 2 bulbs, plump as unambitious pears, then kiss them together by a neck so slender it could slip through a wedding ring, although no one bothers to try. Apprentices test the passage with poppy seeds, counting how many escape before 1 sticks. 3 seeds lodging in succession means the neck is too mean. 1 seed slipping through sideways means it's too friendly. The master, whose beard contains more soot than philosophy, aims for a throat roughly 3 millimeters across because a borrowed quill shaft of that width once produced a pleasing 40-minute descent. Nobody owns calipers, so they trust the quill, reheating until the opening answers with a sigh that sounds exactly like glass admitting modesty. Scholars later classify these early apertures as approximately quill, a unit that never enters any syllabus but might lull a curious mind into gentler arithmetic. Centuries tiptoe forward, and monastery timekeepers trade poppy seeds for river sand plucked where currents slow to a whisper. They rinse the grains until each glints like a muted star, then dry them on cloister tiles warmed by whispered psalms. When the bell ringer complains that sand occasionally clumps, monks debate whether the throat should widen from 3 to 4 millimeters, a full millimeter being, in monkish terms, a daring extravagance. Trials follow. Narrow glasses deliver punctual prayers, but jam whenever humidity forgets itself. Wider throats flow cheerfully, yet cheat the midday office by an entire creed's length. One abbot proposes coating sand with beeswax dust to restore discipline without widening the neck, but beeswax attracts cathedral mice, whose nocturnal scrabbling rearranges grains like unsolicited footnotes. Ultimately, the aperture settles at 3.5 millimeters, a courtesy halfway between rigor and resignation, the Goldilocks of glass constrictions. Though no fairy tale references are spoken aloud inside stone walls, decks creak under sun-bleached sailors, who measure watches, not prayers. Maritime hourglasses, lashed near compasses, must brave pitch and heave without choking. Shipwrights answer with throats carved broad as immodest. Straw 5 millimeters insisting that ocean spray thickens sand the way gossip thickens silence. Captains test each timer by inverting it during dinner. If grains stick, the glass is quietly retired to the fate of holding pickles. To calibrate flow, quartermasters substitute sand with dried peas, tallying clicks against a spoken litany of one Mississippi before realizing Mississippis have yet to be discovered in their atlas. They revert to Latin numbers, which stumble less in storms. A micro hook emerges every so often. A cabin boy wagers that oatmeal will fall slower than sand and invents breakfast timing, though his device ends up flavoring the hour with a faint porridge scent. Admiralty boards issue charts recommending neck diameters not less than the girth of a stout knitting needle, a standard warmly embraced because knitting needles are easier to borrow than microscopes. Factories bloom beside railroads, and glass no longer waits for monasteries or mahogany halls. In 1872, a Yorkshire engineer patents a metal collar mold that guarantees apertures of exactly 4 millimeters with a tolerance thinner than a sigh. Catalogs announce precision throat never deviates, though buyers soon learn that sand itself has opinions. A Swiss horologist fills an hourglass with powdered garnet to gain ruby red elegance. Garnet grains, heavier than quartz, hurry through the throat like commuters late for chapel, yielding an hour in 42 restless minutes. The engineer widens the neck by 0.5 millimeter and proudly labels the result garnet model, forgetting the Swiss are rare clients. Undeterred, marketing pamphlets bloom with diameter options: 3 millimeters for fine quartz, 4 millimeters for river sand, 4.5 millimeters for theatrical glitter intended to shimmer under gaslight. Glitter, alas, carries static woes. Half the grains cling to glass, forming accidental constellations. Playhouses still adore them, claiming stalled sparkles dramatize Act IV's pause better than actors could. Electric clocks invade parlors, but hourglasses refuse extinction. They migrate to board game boxes where 3-minute timers herd players toward turn discipline. Plastic replaces glass. Manufacturers pinch throats with injection molds that cannot be bothered with whimsical 0.5 millimeters. The standard lands on 4 because the mold cavity says so, and 4 is as round as a factory whistle. Children discover tapping the end speeds the flow. Patents arise for anti-cheat constricted waists, narrowing throats to 3.8 millimeters, and nesting veins inside like polite speed bumps. Focus group tests reveal that timers under 2 minutes trigger impatience. Those over 3 induce philosophical staring, so throat diameter becomes the unseen governor of family harmony. Somewhere, a bored uncle counts 12 taps per descent and coins the phrase, "A tap a turn keeps boredom inurned," which no one repeats except late at night when rules slur into lullabies. Designers in the 21st century craft desktop hourglasses, tall as kittens, filled with black iron filings that creep past a hidden magnet near the throat. Aperture size must now juggle both gravity and magnetism, settling around 4.2 millimeters to let filings reluctantly tumble in ragged clumps. Spec sheets promise chaos with intolerances, a slogan surprisingly apt for most meetings. Meanwhile, wellness. Gurus market sand-white timers calibrated for 1-minute breathing exercises. Their necks shrink daringly to 2.5 millimeters, forcing powder fine as size. Critics say the flow stalls in damp climates. Devotees claim the pause is the point. ISO committees glance over proposals for standardized mindfulness apertures and politely file them under future consideration. A cupboard already overflowing with polite postponements. Pick up any hourglass now. Perhaps a souvenir with turquoise sand or a kitchen timer scented faintly of cinnamon. Tilt it, listen to grains begin their whispering descent, and glance at the pinch in the middle so small you could almost imagine squeezing. Time itself between finger and thumb. That diameter, maybe 3 millimeters, maybe 5, contains centuries of shrugged decisions, quill measurements, damp monastery tiles, shipboard oats, and factory molds that declared 4 was plenty. Feel the rhythm as grains cue, hesitate, then surrender to gravity's persuading finger. Each falls, nudging the next, like drowsy thoughts persuading eyelids they've lingered long enough. Let that measured trickle guide you, steady, unhurried, reliable, every second smoothing the edges of the one before until minutes blur into a dune gentle enough to nestle in. When the last grain lands, silence will expand to fill the chamber, and even the aperture will rest, content that it's tiny. Fixed width has let another quietly perfect hour drift past without rushing a single sigh. You might not expect that the limp ribbon tethered to an unassuming tea bag, the bit of string that never quite sits where you place it, could rouse patent clerks, knitting cooperatives, and one fleeting debate about whether 12 or 14 centimeters feels more emotionally polite. Yet here we are, floating through the drowsy chronicle of teabag string length. If you're still awake by the time a Dorset grocer claims the ideal strand should reach the saucer like a cat stretching, not like a dog lunging, feel free to subscribe. But truly, don't ruffle yourself. The kettle will keep murmuring without social media encouragement. At first there is no string at all, only small muslin sacks sewn by hand in a 1904 New York shop, each tossed into a cup by fingers already scented of bergamot and hope. Customers fish the bags out with spoons and note in gentle complaint that wet muslin clings to silver like shy seaweed. An apprentice suggests attaching sewing thread 20 centimeters because that length dangles gracefully without dipping into milk. His spool runs out, the next spool is shorter, and suddenly cups host an unplanned experiment. 19, 18, 17 and a half. Drinkers discovering the shorter ties comment that they feel economical, which is neither compliment nor insult, so the shop averages down to 18 and writes nothing more. Soon cooperatives along the Hudson buy cotton twine by weight. Heavier twine means fewer meters per pound, so strings shrink to 16 centimeters, warehouse length. As ledgers call it, sufficient for mugs, barely for pots. One micro hook drifts by. A stenographer logs that cutting twine 16 and a half. Long reduces wrist fatigue by 3%. Proving boredom can be graphed if you squint kindly enough dot across the Atlantic. A London tea broker packages gauze sachets with lustrous silk cords, 11 centimeters thin as first light, believing elegance should never splash. Patrons complain about scorched fingertips during retrieval. The broker retorts that true gentility uses sugar tongs. Warehouse boys, decidedly ungenteel, splice fallen cords end to end, inventing the first accidental long-string teabag, 32 centimeters of wanderlust. The resulting infuser tangles around biscuit plates and gains, a fan club among daydreamers who like to see something loop slow circles in hot water. By 1920, manufacturers split the difference at 14 centimeters, printing labels that promise no dump knuckles. A Swiss chemist hoping for precision times infusion speed versus string drag and plots a bell curve peaking at 13.8. Marketing teams round to 15 because odd decimals unsettle breakfast. Grocery clerks measure shelf talkers, discovering 15 lets the tag rest just at saucer rim, removing guesswork from retrieval and achievement celebrated with one quiet nod per crate. Warriors requisition cotton so rayon twists replace twine. Rayon's slipperiness tempts strings to untie themselves. Factories compensate by doubling knots, shortening total length to conserve labor. 12 centimeters becomes the ration standard, the utility cord, short enough to hide inside leaflets on thrift. Tea drinkers adapt, pinching tags directly, and national murals depict cheerful fingers avoiding scalds through good posture. A Welsh canteen attendant fashions a wire hook to fish escaped bags and records 5 lost in a week, versus 8 before the string diet, evidence sufficient for continuation. Post-war abundance returns cotton and optimism. Strings stretch, leisurely to 17 again, though some plants stay at 14 because machines remember settings better than managers do. Engineers test tensile limits, discovering that every extra centimeter draws 2 more milligrams of moisture up the braid, darkening tags into Rorschach blots that, according to one board lab tech, tend to resemble puddles or unresolved decisions. They publish a memo suggesting 16 centimeters for humid climates, 15 for dry, 15.5 if unsure. Nobody owns calipers at the packing line, so workers snip by eye and invent a rhythm of thumb width and a blink. Accurate with intolerance of a sleepy side dot, automated heat seals sachet lines of the 1970s. Feed webbed paper and thread from. Spools the diameter of ambition. Optical sensors cut string after counting sprocket teeth, defaulting to exactly 15 centimeters because gearing likes halves and quarters. A Japanese plant producing smaller cups codes its servo for 13. An American diner chain negotiating travel mugs requests 18, so tags drape outside lidded slots like friendly antennae. Standards committees flutter. ISO drafts note 14 to 17 centimeters acceptable. The British Retail Consortium publishes guidance at 16. The German gin group, after much coffee, recommends 15 plus minus 1 with tag weight under 400 milligrams to prevent flip back into liquid during pour. Tags promptly lose cardstock bulk, enabling strings to grow a luxuriant half centimeter without extra mass bureaucracy converted into personal space. A micro hook glimmers. A marketing intern introduces perforated quote tags longer, by 2 centimeters so pithy sayings won't smudge. Collectors arise, trading wisdom like stamps, until print budgets shorten the string. Again to philosophical length dot, the turn of our century brings pyramid bags expansive as tiny tents. Longer spines encourage 18 centimeter cords again. Baristas knot 2 tags together for iced lattes, setting a record of 28 centimeters, though customers later admit they use the string mostly as stirrers. Meanwhile, eco-designers. Trial jute twine scented with vanilla bean. Vanilla oils migrate, slipping knots almost reduced to 13 centimeters where tangles offer friction. Results smell pleasant but tie strangely, and the project retires to a sunny archive. Today, mass producers settle into a quiet corridor, 15 for black tea, 16 for herbal sachets that puff air like sleepy balloons, 14 for hotel. Single serves destined for narrow cups whose saucers have gone missing. Pull any modern string and you'll feel the compromise. Long enough to loop around a teaspoon, short enough that the tag won't tickle your chin during first sip. Lift your own tea bag, now notice the subtle tension where thread meets folded. Paper, count a palm span, likely 16 centimeters drifting down to tag. Dip it and feel steam coax tiny twists straight. Watch the tag idle at rim height and anchor light on a calm harbor. That measured slack was whispered into being by soot-bearded apprentices, naval quartermasters, rayon quotas, servo gears, and vanilla daydreams, each trimmed or granted millimeters so you could dangle, swirl, and rescue with fingers dry. Let that small modulated arc guide your breathing. Inhale as the string slackens, exhale as it tightens, grains of patience per centimeter, cup after cup. When the tag at last rests against porcelain, threads glistening with earned dew, may your own thoughts emulate its poise held by just enough length to drift, never so long they lose their way to shore. You might not expect that the quiet interval between two wooden slats on a park bench, the finger-wide canyon where crumbs, promises, and the occasional pencil stub disappear could invite carpenters to consult astronomers, provoke city councils, to argue in half-inch yawns, and inspire one fleeting fashion for lavender-scented varnish. Yet here we are, easing into the nearly invisible chronicle of bench slat spacing. If you're still awake by the time a Paris landscape architect insists that 19 millimeters feel just as friendly as a handshake you don't have to return, feel free to subscribe, or simply lean back. The benches will keep waiting, without applause. The earliest slatted benches appear in a Victorian ironworks catalog that smells faintly of coal dust and optimism. Their cedar boards rest 3/8 of an inch apart because the pattern happened to match the metal. Jig the blacksmith used to cool horseshoes. Patrons in Hyde Park note the gaps, swallow umbrella tips too eagerly, so a groundskeeper hammers. And thin copper shims, shrinking space to a Puritan quarter-inch. Newspaper editorials praise the innovation for saving silk parasols, though sparrows complain, according to one amused letter, that their popcorn raids now require smaller feet. Across the Atlantic, a Boston Common Commission's benches with half-inch gulfs, claiming wider gaps let rain escape with moral efficiency. Visitors discover a coin dropped through this gulf rings like a church bell on granite below. Children conduct impromptu toll collections, inspiring bead string sellers to lobby for even wider chasms. City fathers counter by ordering a precise 3/8 compromise, because compromise always sounds scientific when phrased as a fraction. Decades drift and paint peels into trivia. A municipal engineer in Copenhagen tests 30 benches by sweeping sawdust across them, timing how long breezes take to clear each aperture. His chart reveals that gaps under 8 millimeters hold dust like introverts hoarding anecdotes. Wow. Those above 20 let drafts scoot wrappers straight onto lawns. He presents findings in a meeting where half the attendees nap through the metric conversions. The final recommendation, 15 millimeters, wins by virtue of being between other numbers and rhyming, in Danish with the word for please. Builders adopt it, unaware that the Danish word also rhymes with sneeze, leading one columnist to joke the gap is only polite if you cover it. A micro hook whispers past. An elderly pianist measures gaps by laying a flat key from a discarded instrument across them. When the key fits snugly, she deems the bench suitable for score reading, thereby inventing the most unnecessary quality test in outdoor furniture. 20th century factories swap cedar for pressure-treated pine, then for aluminum ribs coated, and paint thick as marmalade. Metal branches warp in sunlight, so designers widen slits to prevent thermal expansion from fusing boards into an accidental gong. A U.S. Parks Department calculates that a 5/8 inch spacing allows expansion. yet stops small dogs from hiding toys underneath. A victory footnoted in annual reports under miscellaneous successes. Marketing brochures renamed the 5/8 gap comfort breathing line, a phrase that persuades purchasers, though nobody asks what exactly the bench is breathing. Post-war ergonomists studying circulation declare that hard edges pressing. Thighs through gaps thicker than 3/4 of an inch leave scallop prints resembling Morse code. One restless intern translates the marks and claims they spell sit softer. His memo survives in archives purely because archivists enjoy small rebellions. By the 1970s, plastics join the parade. Extruded slats arrive with pre-molded combs. Locking spacing at 16 millimeters, accurate to the smug sigh of a machine that never examines its work. Cities relish maintenance savings. Pigeons lament fewer crumb ledges. Romance novelists appreciate the new bench's refusal to snag delicate fabrics. Yet skateboarders, eyeing the tidy rails, lobby for wider gaps to reduce grind friction. Request park planners deflect with polite coughs. Somewhere a German chemist adds ultraviolet stabilizers to the plastic that expand minutely under heat, pushing gaps to 17 millimeters by mid-afternoon, shrinking them to 15 when stars reclaim the sky. Maintenance crews, bewildered, blame orbital mechanics and schedule inspections nobody minds missing. Contemporary landscape architects resurrect hardwood for sustainability, skeptical of polymers that age like gossip. They convene workshops, aligning teak slats over laser rollers while sipping coffee slow enough to watch caffeine cool. Debates circle around 16 or 17, tasting syllables like vintages. One presenter brandishes a spreadsheet proving 16.2, lets phone screens wedged between boards tilt at an angle perfect for casual scrolling, ensuring modern tranquility. Another shows wind tunnel footage where 15 millimeter gaps whistle a tone matching the key of C sharp, allegedly calming geese. In the end, each firm prints its preferred number in glossy pamphlets, and all firms build benches 3 millimeters wider than specified, because contractors own saw blades that wander like untrained spaniels. Even now, if you wander any city, at dawn when only street sweepers and semi-decisive cats roam, you'll spot benches resting under layers of sometime decisions. Count the gaps. 5/8 here, 15 millimeters there. 19 on that artistic installation that doubles as a xylophone when rain falls just right. Slide a fingertip along one aperture. Feel its modest breath, enough for breeze, not enough for regret. That space, carved by gloved craftsmen, municipal edicts, sawdust experiments, chocolate bar wrappers, and the occasional pianist's B-flat P, has settled on dimensions that let daytime worries slip through while keeping bodies supported. Let your own thoughts mimic that spacing, now wide enough for air to pass, narrow enough to hold steady. As night drifts across the slats, each gap rehearses its quiet role. To welcome wind, release crumbs, and measure, in the tiniest hush, the distance between waking and sleep. You might not expect that the distance between two prick holes nibbling at the edge of a postage stamp, the quiet rhythm of perforation could marshal clockmakers, summon railway whistles as measuring aids, and inspire one particularly earnest debate about whether an 11 and a half gauge feels more soothing than an exact 12. Yet here we are, drifting through the nearly inaudible chronicle of stamp perforation spacing. If you're still awake by the time a Victorian postmaster declares the perfect row ought to breathe like polite applause, never like frantic hail, feel free to subscribe, or simply let the spindle keep chattering. It has counted far. More holes than there are stars you intend to observe tonight. The story pads into view in 1840, when the very first penny blacks leave presses with borders as stern as a ledger's margin. Postal clerks armed with shears stiff from trimming ledgers must snip each stamp from its sheet one by one. They cut carefully in candlelight, Then squint at rollers smudged by ink and sigh when misalignment slices off Queen Victoria's ear. A London stationer named Henry Archer tires of the regal casualties and fashions a board fitted with rows of brass pins, 22 to a linear inch, simply because that's how many he can drill before tea. Sheets slide over the pins. A mallet tap forces paper through. Stamps separate like petals coaxed from crepe. Clerks cheer, though the holes look jagged, as if moths nibbled in tidy queues. Archer frowns, tightens the grid to 24. The difference feels less like an innovation, more like an afternoon shrug, and the edges improve. Thus the idea of counting holes per 2 centimeters, eventually called perforation gauge, enters philately with the quiet confidence of a cat deciding where to nap. Across the channel, French printers experiment with rouletting tiny diamond cuts instead of holes, yet collectors complain rouletted edges catch on album hinges like wayward burrs. Perforators return, now steam-powered, hissing beneath iron rafters that smell of varnish and Monday resolve. British machines adopt a neat 12 holes within the span of 2 centimeters. Not 11, not 13, because someone's pocket. Watch ticks 12 times if you listen from mallet strike to mallet reset. Colonial outposts copy the standard, but discover humid air swells paper, shrinking perforation counts in practice. In Ceylon, a foreman notes sheets read 11 3/4 after monsoon nights. He files a report titled Tropical. Gauge drift, which no one in London reads past the phrase slight irregularity. Meanwhile, Canadian presses, chilled by timber yard breezes, find paper contracts. Their same machines yield 12 1/3. Thus, early albums bloom with edges whispering of climate before stamps even leave the postmaster's desk. Philateless, armed with magnifiers and the patience of moss, begin measuring. By 1880, the humble perforation gauge tool resembles a ruler holding its breath, printed with rows of dots getting denser like polite crowds at a garden party. Collectors slide stamps along until holes align, then record numbers such as 1212 if top and sides match, or the slightly scandalous 12 times 11.5 if a sheet once lunched unevenly on its pins. Auction catalogs blossom with decimals. 14.25 fetches size, 9.5 raises eyebrows, and the mythical 18 of some New Zealand mid-air mail evokes raised teacups. One micro hook every so often. A German school teacher swears his best sleep arrives. While counting gauges backwards, 17, 16.5, 16, drifting off before the row ambles into the fussy teens. The second scene arrives beneath fluorescent clank of 20th century rotary perforators, whose wheels sprout steel teeth like well-organized gardens of impatience. To reduce, tearing, engineers stagger the pen's first forward 9 degrees, then back to create a bridge of paper that resists hasty tugging. Trial sheets emerge with gauges of 11 1/4. Spreadsheets confirm tier strength improves, by a fraction unnoticeable outside boardrooms. Nonetheless, the fraction appears in annual reports as significant, a word that serenely survives proofreading. Wartime economies reduce metal, pin diameters shrink, yielding smaller holes, increasing gauge counts to 13, though nobody orders this. The paper simply volunteers for narrower gaps. Philatelic newsletters describe the new look as lace-like, a compliment that buries a sigh about how easily lace snags. Collectors coin the phrase war perforation and later confess it helps. Them sort envelopes while the radio mutters headlines best ignored. Third, we drift into the white-gloved hush of expertizing rooms where ultraviolet lamps hum like off-key lullabies. Here, specialists verify rare errors by gauge alone. A stamp perforated 14, 14, and 1910 that mistakenly run through an 11 gauge. Machine in 1911 now commands a premium equal to a bicycle 2 if the misgauge spared the monarch's chin. One examiner measures with calipers while another listens to 78 RPM. Shellac requiring hand cranks. The gentle clack syncs with hole counting, proof that boredom can duet gracefully with technology. Every so often a stamp surfaces with perforations. So wild 9 on one edge, 15 on the next that committees debate whether the press hiccuped or the clerk celebrated payday early. Papers are written, diagrams drawn, and ultimately the oddity is cataloged as a prox gauge variable, a label as soothingly vague as a lullaby promising morning eventually. Finally, the fourth scene glides into self-adhesive issues of the 21st century, where stamps arrive kiss-cut on backing paper, perforations replaced by die-cut wobbles emulating holes no longer present. Machines ETCH sinusoidal blades dancing at 11.6 pseudo gauge so collectors don't clutch pearls. Yet some nations retain real perforations for tradition, drilling micro holes as tiny as espresso whispers. These register at gauge 18, but because the tool's numbers stop at 16, philatelists add new rows with pens, demonstrating devotion and a mild disregard for manufacturing limits. Digital presses then print QR codes. Technicians worry holes may nibble essential pixels, so perforations retreat to spear points shaped like puzzle pieces. The official gauge remains approximately 12, because decimals sound unsteady next to software versions already hogging that job. Somewhere a marketing writer suggests lavender-scented gum to mask machine oil. Scent migrates, confuses bees, and is abandoned before reaching suburban mailboxes. But a handful of sample sheets still linger in filing cabinets, perfed obediently. At 11.8, smelling faintly of postponed picnics, hold any stamp now under lamplight. Tilt it until shadows gather inside the tiny arches where paper met pen. Count if you like, maybe 11 holes along 2 centimeters, maybe 12, maybe a fractional whisper dissimulized by decades of machinery arguing with humidity. Each gap smaller than a breath, larger than indifference records when blades. Pressed down for an instant, then lifted, leaving a promise that separation could happen gently. Let that repeated promise guide your own breathing. Inhale as if your lungs align with row 1. Exhale across row 2. Breathe again through row 3 until the whole pane of evening air has been delicately detached from daylight. Eventually, the sheet of consciousness will ease away, your thoughts no longer tethered by jagged doubt but floating free, edges neat, numbered perhaps 11.75, perhaps exactly 12, whichever gauge dreams find most forgiving tonight. You might not expect that the gentle oval hidden inside a humble paperclip, the inner loop that never actually touches. Paper could prompt metallurgists to sharpen dividers, coax haberdashers into lending hat pins for prototypes, and launch. A brief seaside crusade comparing 6.8mm curves to the calm of low tide. Yet here we are, drifting through the quiet chronicle of paperclip loop radius. If you're still awake by the time a Norwegian station master decides the ideal bend should cradle precisely 3 grains of coarse salt, no more, no less, feel free to subscribe. Or simply let the clip keep dozing on your desk. It has corralled invoices faithfully without ever demanding applause. An ironmonger and Victorian. Birmingham begins the tale by straightening piano wire beside a pot-bellied stove that crackles like distant applause. He winds the wire around a broom handle, shaved down to 7mm because that's the nearest cylinder not currently sweeping soot. The twin loops it yields nestled together like cautious commas, holding papers as politely as a butler's nod. Clerks love the novelty but complain that turning pages feels like coaxing a sleepy cat. Pleasant, yet oddly resistant. The ironmonger borrows his daughter's crochet hook slender at 6mm and discovers the tighter curve grips. Pages yet flips free with something close to cheerfulness. 7 becomes 6, notebooks breathe easier. Ledger keepers deem the new clip satisfactorily vigilant, a phrase so warm it survives 3 office moves and 1 accidental fire. Across the channel, a Paris stationer determined to outswoon. Birmingham presses brass wire around a champagne cork whittled to 5 millimeters. The resulting clip looks elegant but pinches like new shoes, leaving faint crescents on invoices considered too freckled for polite company. Accountants grumble, poets purchase anyway, insisting the bite instills discipline in drafts. A micro hook drifts by. One poet measures the pinch mark's depth and claims it mirrors the average sigh, submitting the finding to a journal nobody funds. Meanwhile, French clerks insert sheets with a practice shimmy, prompting the stationer to dub the curve Le Clin d'Huile bureaucratique, the bureaucratic wink. 10,000 wink clips sell before someone notices brass tarnish at seaside. Humidity, staining margins pale green. The radius relaxes to 5.5 millimeters, a compromise that smudges fewer poems but still whispers urban chic. Steam rivets pound through 1900s America, where patent offices ring with claims and counterclaims. The gem-type clip, twisted from 8-inch lengths of steel wire, settles on an inner loop of roughly 6.2 millimeters because early draw plates shave wire to gauges matching. Piano string catalogs an accidental marriage of stationery and sonata. Machine operators discover that bending smaller radii fractures temper. Bending larger misaligns twin tongues, forcing paper to stare through crooked spectacles. They mark 6.2 on chalkboards, underline it twice, and break for lunch. Mass production adopts the measure, calling it medium hold, though packaging proudly prints one size secures all. Railway clerks test the claim by stuffing 20 sheets beneath each clip. Anything thinner than 6 millimeters bows gracefully, anything thicker claws free. The radius remains unquestioned until a blustery Tuesday when an Iowa grain broker jams 40-page freight schedules beneath one clip and discovers it surrenders with a plink, launching a Midwest fascination with sturdier curves. Factories respond by widening inner ovals to 7 millimeters for freight-grade clips painted barn red, the pigments hiding scuffs and flattering cornmeal dust. World wars tighten metal supplies. Manufacturers turn to cadmium-coated wire slim as thrift. Slim wire bends more willingly, allowing inner loops to shrink to 5.8 millimeters without cracking, which means clips can be stamped 4 up instead of 3 up on ration coils. Advertisements boast economy radius closes like kindness, ignoring that cadmium leaves a gray smudge on damp hands. Clerks wipe fingers on trousers and continue. Grateful deadlines don't notice fingerprints. In naval logistics offices where humidity tests patience, clip loops widen again to 6.5 millimeters, so swelling pages keep dignity. Some smart soul adds serrations to outer loops, claiming better airflow. The serrations catch on pockets, prompting. Pocket linings defile a collective complaint through tailors. Designers quietly file the teeth off, but the 6.5 millimeters throat survives, praised now for being neither too clingy nor too aloof. Photocopiers usher in the age of stapler contempt, and paper clips reinvent themselves as reusable charm. Silicon Valley. Startups prefer anodized aluminum wire bent round precisely 6 millimeters dowels, dyed periwinkle to match branding decks. Engineers note aluminum rebounds gently, holding fewer pages but releasing without creasing edges ideal for iteration proud. Design briefs. Focus groups finger flick test loops, declaring 6 to 7 millimeters feels agile. Marketing translates agile into ClipTech 6R, printing the name in fonts so thin they nearly float off boxes. Elsewhere, archivists cling to 6.8 millimeters stainless because Russ writes its own footnotes. A Swiss banking consortium secretly commissions gold-plated clips with an inner loop of exactly 6.66 millimeters. Numerology for interest compounding, then locks. Them in vaults where nobody enjoys their satanically precise embrace. Eco-friendly bamboo paper arrives thicker, thirstier for space, pressing clip designers to revisit radii. A Dutch workshop tests loops at 7.2, 7.5, even 8 millimeters, observing that anything beyond 7.4 allows bamboo sheaths to breathe without wedging. The team settles on 7.3, stamping files with labels reading forest kind curvature. 1 micro hook every half minute. A volunteer folds origami cranes from clip crease test strips. Noticing cranes formed with 7.3 loops display wingspans, 0.5 millimeter wider than those creased by 6.2. She declares the difference emotionally significant. The project manager logs it under qualitative outcomes and orders T-dot in our lit-D lit present. Robotic testers flick clips on and off. Paper stacks while cameras time relaxation bounce to the millisecond. Data trends converge. 6.4 millimeters offers optimal recovery, never flattening after 100 cycles, yet refusing to scar cardstock. Draft ISO guidelines thus whisper 6.0 to 6.8 as the global comfort corridor. Still, artisanal micro brands pop up on crowdfunding sites touting avant-garde 5.7 loops for minimalist notebooks or generous 7.9 for bullet journaling maximalists. Backers pledge, curiosities ship, and most users eventually drift back to the quietly effective middle ground, a place broad enough for steadiness, narrow enough for modesty, exactly where the gem clip sat all along. Pick up any paper clip now. Peer into its inner loop while lamplight glances off muted steel. Is that gap closer to 6 millimeters or 7? Trace it with a fingernail. Feel how the wire's innermost arc remains smooth, unhurried, inviting no corners to snag passing. Thoughts. Imagine the loop cradling exactly 1 jasmine grain of rice. 2 if you stack carefully. This is the radius thousands have adjusted by fraction since Broom. Handles warmed Birmingham workshops. Slide a page beneath the clip. Hear the muted tick as radius meets fiber, a sound as brief as an eyelash meeting cheek. Let that tick count your breathing. In on the gentle pinch, out on the gentle release. Again. Again. Soon the radius will cradle not only pages but the edges of your evening mind, holding dreams in a gentle embrace no tighter than necessary, no looser than kind, until morning rounds its own quiet wire and the loop, still unassuming, is ready to hold the next calm. Stack of hours. You might not expect that the slant of a simple rubber door stop, the quiet wedge that lounges beneath an undecided door could summon draftsmen armed with protractors, lure innkeepers into counting floorboard squeaks, and ignite a politely relentless quarrel about whether 15 or 17 degrees feels more welcoming to passing breezes. Yet here we are, drifting through the hushed chronicle of doorstop wedge angles. If you remain awake by the time a Devonshire carpenter confides that 16 degrees encouraged conversation that never gossip, feel free to subscribe or simply allow the door to settle where it wishes. Wedges have a patient relationship with gravity that does not rely on audience applause. The tale opens in a medieval priory kitchen where heavy oak doors swing like moods between warmth and draft. A novice monk, weary of winter gusts scattering embers, whittles a triangle from leftover bread crust. The angle is purely accidental, a result of bread collapsing in the oven, yet it props the door at what modern instruments would call roughly 14 degrees. Records note that mealtime complaints drop by half, which the abbot attributes less to geometry than to obedient silence. But the novice repeats the wedge in fur when the bread hardens into archaeology. Carpenters later measure the angle against a pew rail and describe it as half a hand span across, perhaps 1 knuckle high, a unit precise enough for centuries where patience outpaced precision. Centuries tiptoe forward, in Georgian manner, Halls adopt doorstops carved from mahogany scraps. A London joiner, mindful of fashion, consults a draftsman who sketches slopes in 2-degree increments. The draftsman recommends 15 degrees, claiming it mirrors the lean of a gentleman's. Bow when acknowledging a minor acquaintance, neither curt nor effusive. Housewives test the wedges and report that doors held at 15 close themselves politely after a hearty slam, almost as if reconsidering the noise. Curious, the joiner experiments with shallower inclines. 13 degrees lets kitchen doors drift shut the way a cat might decide against exploring rain. 11 produces dithering half-closures that squeak indecisively at midnight. Residents complain, and the joiner, feeling scholarly, publishes a broadsheet proclaiming 15 as the golden modesty angle, a title that survives 2 editions. Before humor journals strip it of capital letters, industrial presses hiss into the 19th century, spitting out vulcanized rubber. A Scottish rubber mill fashions wedges sold by the pound. Molds default to 17 degrees because that angle slips neatly between die halves already used for boot heels. Shop clerks praise the extra bite on polished marble. Librarians, however, lament that 17 lifts double-hinged reading room doors too high, revealing drafts strong enough to flutter catalog cards. A university study in Cambridge sets up an anemometer behind each wedge angle and discovers that 16 degrees blocks gusts 4% better than 17. The paper's footnote wonders if Comer libraries might shorten exam season quarrels. Yet city hotels cling to 17 for its theatrical gap, wide enough for bellboys to fit nudge trays through without bending. A micro hook drifts past every half minute. One bellboy times his deliveries, insists 17 saves 18 seconds per room, and thus secures a modest raise, though future accountants quietly round the number down to avoid precedent dot by. The 1920s rubber gives way to molded cellulose acetate and pastel hues. Factory engineers armed with protractors and stopwatches hold races, wedges at 14, 15, 16, and 17 degrees prop identical doors while assistants tug handles with spring gauges. The ideal must resist 8 pounds of pull, yet release under 12. Tests reveal 14 skids on linoleum, 15 holds but squeals, 16 whispers, 17 shouts. Marketing teams seize on Silent 16, printing angle diagrams that resemble gentle mountains lounging on packaging. Still, hospitals adopt 15 because night shift nurses claim it yields the softest closing thumb when oxygen tanks roll by. Engineers, amused, label the discrepancy contextual acoustics and move on to color palettes named after clouds. Then wartime rubber rationing returns, and wooden wedges reclaim corridors, plain to whichever slope the saw blade fancies, often 15 when sharpened hurriedly, sometimes 18 when fatigue leans wrists. Variability becomes camouflage. Doors still decide, in the end, to stay or wander. Plastic returns in the television glow of the 1950s. Suburban catalogs illustrate wet silhouettes alongside vacuum cleaners, promising streamlined angles without stating numbers. DIY magazines instruct readers to cut their own from salvaged broom handles. Simply mark a 16-degree bevel, they say, as if every garage harbors a bevel gauge. Some readers eyeball the line, producing wedges closer to 12 degrees that behave like reluctant pancakes. Others overshoot to 19, discovering that steepness can bruise parquet beneath heavy doors. Letters flood editorial desks. One claims a 19-degree wedge curbs rambunctious toddlers by refusing to budge. Another insists it trips elderly aunts during bridge night. Editorial boards suggest 17 for hallways, 15 for parlors, 16 if in doubt. Doubt, apparently, favors the middle. Aerospace polymers glide into the 1980s, birthing wedges translucent as candied fruit. Injection molding robots delight in precision and choose 15.5 degrees because mold release studies indicate less. Sticking. ISO committee's notice in flow to draft spec. Doorstop angle shall be 15.2 degrees unless otherwise justified. Scandinavian designers, fond of decimals, release 15.8 degree wedges marketed as Nordic equilibrium. Their catalog copy whispers that 15.8 aligns with the axial tilt of certain barley stems, a fact neither verified nor disputed because it relaxes readers so thoroughly. Meanwhile, office building architects specify 16 precisely, citing wheelchair ramp harmonies. Contractors nod and install 17 because catalog stock runs thicker there. A quiet lesson emerges. Angles obey warehouses before they obey committees. Now, in LED brightened hallways where conference room doors sigh against recycled rubber wedges speckled with confetti from retired gym shoes. Robotic arms still cut slopes true to 16 degrees, give or take factory vibrations measured in microns. Data from sensor badges reveal employees nudge doors an average of twice per meeting. Software correlates fewer nudges with angles between 15.7 and 16.3. Facilities managers quietly swap out older wedges, reporting cost savings in elbow grease. Yet artisanal workshops online tout 18-degree hardwood wedges for mindful separation, pairing them with sanded beeswax finishes that smell like patient mornings. Influencers film slow-motion door releases, measuring hush in frames per second, not decibels. Comments debate whether extra degrees invite or discourage productivity, each opinion drifting like dust in angled sunlight. Pick up any wedge within reach, perhaps rubber flecked with history, perhaps wood remembering. Sap. Sight along its slope. Does it lean nearer to 15, 16, or the ambitious 17? Lay it under an imaginary door. Feel the yielding grip between floor and oak. That single, unassuming angle has been whittled, poured, bevel sawn, and bevel measured by monks guarding embers, librarians courting silence, factory robots chasing decimal serenity. Let its gentle incline guide your own breathing. Inhale as if climbing the slope. Exhale sliding softly down, again and again, the world outside propped at just the right invitation. Soon the door of wakefulness will rest against the wedge of dusk, neither shut nor wide, simply poised, while thoughts settle like evening dust along the line cut long ago to the quiet purpose of 16 agreeable degrees. You might not expect that the calm stretch of empty paper between two faint blue lines, the ruled interval quietly awaiting ink, could convene surveyors armed with yardsticks, draw needle-faced nuns into disputes involving barleycorns, and provoke one short-lived fad for lavender-scented guidelines exactly 7 millimeters apart. Yet here we are, ambling through the near-silent chronicle of notebook line spacing. If you're still awake by the time a Midwestern stationer asserts that 8 millimeters invites ideas without crowding their elbows, feel free to subscribe, or simply let your own thoughts drift between the margins. Those patient bands of pastel will keep their vigil regardless of subscribers. Our story begins in the damp loft of an 18th century mill where rag pulp dries in gentle rhythms. Paper arrives pristine, a plain field of possibilities, which terrifies schoolmasters tasked with teaching neatness. An enterprising clerk in Bath, after too many evenings erasing wandering sums, stretches twine dipped in lampblack across blank sheets, snapping it down to leave sooty stripes. He spaces the twine by eye, roughly a 1/4 inch, about 6 millimeters, since a 1/4 inch is the width of his thumbnail and thumbnails travel well. The class reports dramatic improvement in column alignment, although one boy observes that the charcoal smudges smell faintly like over-toasted pumpernickel. Teachers praise the new order, and soon printers experiment with copperplate rollers etched in parallel grooves. The earliest roller carves 5 lines to the inch, 5 lpi, a measurement that libraries will later equate to 5.1 millimeters, but which contemporaries simply call copybook. Paper so ruled finds its way into parlors where young ladies practice. Minuscule French verbs, each word lounging exactly halfway between rails that resemble short fences built to shepherd sheepish vowels. Across the channel, French stationers, partial to decimal flourish, ignore thumb widths and declare a noble 7 millimeters. They name the distance sais after a Parisian printer who once claimed 7 suited the sweep of a quill's flourish. Copyists adore the headroom. Ascenders like L and H stretch without scraping. Descenders like G and Y dangle their loops, and teachers bless the consistent posture. A micro hook drifts by. A Lycean discovers that folding sais paper into paper cranes yields wings precisely aligned with crease lines, a serendipity leading to efficient cheat notes tucked under wings. Administrators scowl, but no one blames the spacing. They merely propose stricter crane inspections at exam halls. Across the Atlantic, colonial merchants import British quarter-inch, yet American punch press operators find their steel combs where unevenly have that density. To prolong die life, they widen grooves to 9/32, which whispers near 7.1 millimeters but travels under the marketing name wide rule. Children rejoice in extra room for looping capitals. Penmanship guides illustrate pancakes. Of P swelling to proper plumpness. By 1870, ruled paper divides society as quietly as tea preferences. Wide rule for elementary exuberance. Narrow rule 8 lines per inch for clerks and college scholars whose smaller letters reveal. Budget trimmed ink costs. College rule at 8 lines per inch, 3.2 millimeters, arrives when a Boston printer's apprentice misreads a template meant for ledger columns and crowds lines closer. Professors complaining about eye strain inadvertently popularize the style. Students relish fitting more formulae per page, perceiving thrift in every cramped theorem. The printer seizes the narrative, stamps college edition on bundles, and sells them at a penny advance, proving scarcity can masquerade as prestige if measured in millimeters. Industrial rollers roar through the 1910s, and images of precise gauges adorn advertisements like proud parent portraits. Machines now score at 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters, 7.5 millimeters, and the experimental 6.8 millimeters intended for bilingual shorthand. Typists testing carbon copies find 6 millimeters forces letters to cuddle, while 8 millimeters feels like inviting neighbors over for supper but forgetting the chairs. A Philadelphia stenographer times her shorthand speed, 80 words per minute on 6 millimeters, 83 on 7, then back to 79 on 8, perhaps due to wrist travel. She publishes findings in a trade journal. Manufacturers reprint the graph without consulting her, boosting 7 millimeters as productivity spacing, though skeptics note the sample size was lunch break for one. Still, 7 grows popular enough that metric bookstores adopts standard, a word meaning hardly controversial enough to mention. World War II rationing thins ink, prompting printers to lighten line pigments to conserve dye. Pale blue emerges as economical and easy on the eyes. Chemists dub it azure process. At lighter densities, paper reveals subtle thickness variations. Engineers discover lines printed too close amplify these undulations, causing nibs to chatter like nervous. Typewriters. Thus, a gentle return to 7.5 millimeters spreads through ledgers labeled government form compliant. Soldiers writing home on such sheets fold letters along lines, generating accordion pleats that slip into thin envelopes. Postal clerks observe that 7.5 distances align fortuitously with creases, minimizing bulk proof that even spacing can enlist quietly. Scene 3 ushers in plastic ballpoint pens that skate. not scratch. Ballpoints adore narrower rules. 6mm rises again under the banner International, a descriptor as vague as a cloud, but just aspirational enough. Japanese notebooks appear with 6mm lines and dotted verticals at 3mm intervals to encourage kanji symmetry. Meanwhile, German engineers propose a hybrid, 8mm outer rule with a faint 4mm midline, calling it Schuler lineator, perfect for fledgling letters still negotiating heights. Copybook pages now feature triple zones: basement, ground floor, attic. Parents measure progress by which stories letters visit without trespass. A micro hook surfaces. A Swiss teacher awards chocolate for every page where lowercase f's keep heads in the attic and tails politely off the basement pipes. Confectioners notice modest spikes in weekly sales equal to spelling bee seasons. Computers tiptoe in, promising pixel-perfect digital rules. Yet printers hungry for physical guides are coded to spew 0.25-inch grid by default, resurrecting quarter-inch, 6.35mm in spreadsheets disguised as stationery. Graphic designers, fond of golden proportions, introduce 5.5mm boutique. Ruling printed in soft gray that vanishes when photocopied, ideal for brainstorming destined for slides. They name it Ghost Rule, though some call it bank loan because only agencies can afford boutique print runs. Not to be outdone, bullet journal enthusiasts adopt dot grid at exactly 5mm, praising modular efficiency. Dots look less opinionated than lines, leaving plenty of breathing space for midnight doodles of moon faces. Stationers slap holographic. Stickers on covers to justify the half-millimeter rebellion. Wellness gurus craft mindfulness journals with 9mm deep breath spacing, including pastel prompts above every fifth line. Exhale slowly, notice the margin. A trial finds participants yawn 17% more often when using deep breath rule mission accomplished, perhaps. Lavender-scented ink briefly perfumes guides at 7mm. Librarians protest, citing moth confusion among antique bindings, and the scent quietly evaporates from catalogs. We arrive now at Lit Bit Present, where fountain pen aficionados debate between Japanese 6mm and European 7mm on forums that scroll endlessly. They photograph nib flecks measured against grids, claiming 6 fosters discipline, 7 invites romance, 8 offers generosity. One clever coder writes a script to overlay letter forms on different rules. The heat map suggests human handwriting rarely respects any border with fidelity greater than 0.4. Discussion groups print this result and continue debating because tranquility thrives on gentle disagreement. Pick up any ruled sheet nearby, hold it to lamplight, and examine that quiet interval. Perhaps a measured 6mm, crisp like a well-ironed sleeve. Maybe 7.2mm. Subtle as afternoon light through blinds. Run a fingertip along the valley, feel no ridge, yet sense the invitation. Each stripe whispers of copper rollers, twine dipped in soot, decimals argued in dusty boardrooms, ink saved for war, and digital printers humming in oblong cubicles. Breathe in on one line, hold for the empty band, exhale upon the next, a rhythm. Presses itself across lungs the way faint azure persists across pulp. As thoughts grow drowsy, they settle between lines like gentle feathers. Letters may float up later, but for now spaces cradle them, unhurried. Precisely indifferent whether you measure in millimeters, inches, or the width of a thumbnail remembering distant candles. May these intervals, born of quiet centuries, hold tonight's half-formed notions as softly as they once poised quills, until morning turns the page and rules once more invite the day's sentences to file in, one slow, spacious line at a time. You might not expect that the quiet slant of a wooden reading stand, the mild tilt that persuades a book to remain politely ajar. could lure cathedral carpenters into drawing circles on parchment, coax railway clerks to time eye blinks with protractors, and stir one gentleman's club to debate whether 22 or 24 degrees best encourage afternoon drowsing. Yet here we are, easing into the unhurried chronicle of lectern and book rest angles. If you're still awake by the time an Edinburgh librarian sighs that 23 degrees, lets paragraphs float upward like well-behaved balloons, feel free to subscribe or simply allow your eyelids to recline at whatever pitch seems cordial. The stand will keep its angle without requesting applause. The tale begins in a 12th century scriptorium where candlelight breathes against calfskin. Monks copy psalms on desks cut from oak boards propped atop biscuit barrels. One novice, weary of stooping, wedges a spare spindle beneath the back edge and discovers the page greets his gaze with newfound courtesy. He does not measure the angle, no one owns a protractor yet. Later scholars will determine the incline at roughly 21 degrees, give or take the thickness of a bread crust. The abbot approves, noting fewer ink blots shaped like accidental teardrops. Soon carpenters fashion fixed wedges, calling them gospel risers, each shaved to the width of a thumb bone, because thumbs are tools monks were unlikely to misplace. This 21 degrees slips quietly into holy routine, as essential and unremarkable as morning bells. 2 centuries drift past like whispered antiphons, and university halls adopt reading lecterns for disputations. A Paris joiner proud of geometry draws a right triangle upon mulberry paper, labeling one acute corner 25 degrees an angle, matching the lean of a fashionable hat plume. He argues that 25 ensures enough gravity to press pages flat while sparing necks the bashful angle of student humility. Faculty, mixed in wine and pride, adopt the design. Scribes report that long Latin sentences seem slightly shorter when perched on such a slope. Yet across the channel, Oxford dons fond of moderation prefer 23 degrees, claiming it harmonizes with the tilt of England's reign when viewed through mullioned windows. A micro hook wanders by, a burst of records in a ledger. That ink lasts 2 pages longer at 23. The later scholars suspect he merely enjoyed symmetrical numbers. Industrial age. Printing unleashes pamphlets quicker than bakers produce buns. Circulating libraries bloom, each boasting reading stands of varying pedigree. A Manchester mill owner, after observing operatives hunch over lunch pail novels, commissions portable stands stamped from sheet iron bent at a neat 20 degrees. Because his die-press template happens to rest at that setting, clerks praise the sturdiness though lament cooled elbows. They knit wool sleeves for the stands, inadvertently padding the angle into 19 and a bit. Reviewers describe the tilt as brisk yet forgiving. Meanwhile, a New York patent filer submits a contraption with adjustable racks ticking from 15 to 30 in 2-degree strides, marketing it as a universal uplift for both sermons and sheet music. Early buyers click through angles like safecrackers before settling, more often than not, on something between 22 and 24 where words feel elevated but not evangelical dog. By 1900, scientific management breathes its orderly sigh across office landscapes. Ergonomists armed with stopwatches instruct typists to glance between document and carriage return. Shorter eye travel, they argue, saves fractions of seconds that add up like stealthy coins. They recommend 22 degrees for desktop copy holders, citing ocular comfort curves plotted on graph paper drizzled with coffee rings. Memo pads likewise acquire cardboard backs scored to fold at identical angles. One typist notes that coffee spills less dramatically when her notes rest upon such a slope because liquid chooses gravity over rebellion. Government procurement. Offices issue guidelines. Reading surface shall incline between 21 and 24 from horizontal. A band wide enough to dodge lawsuits, narrow enough to sound deliberate. During wartime paper rationing, metal is diverted and plywood stands. Multiply in libraries turn morale centers. Soldiers reading pocket novels prop them on crates angled by whatever scrounged plank remains. Surveys reveal average field angle slumps to 18 degrees, more restful than prescriptive. Psychologists examine troop posture, suggesting that shallower slopes radiate calm yet diminish attentiveness beyond Chapter 7. Their report recommends 21 degrees for debrief halls, but generals, distracted by larger tilts of fortune, shelve the study. After peace, manufacturers rebound with bakelite stands molded to 23.5, advertised in sunset orange brochures as the surest path to upright thought. Scene shifts beneath fluorescent hush of post-war schools where homework perches on metal-framed desks with laminated particle board tops. Production lines standardize at 20 degrees because jigs copy older jigs, inheriting angles like family traits. Teachers stacking spelling tests notice edges slide less at 20 than at 19. Countless BS and CS owe their gentle gradient to this observation. One school district experiments with a dual-sided desk lid, 19 on one face for handwriting. Drills, 24 on the other for art sketch pads. Students flip surfaces, discovering geometry at their fingertips. The project fades when hinges squeak too loudly during geography exams, but not before someone realizes that 24 degrees doubles gracefully to approximate half a right. Angle, a fact later woven into a poem nobody memorizes. Personal computers arrive, humming softly. Monitor risers tilt screens backward, while manuals insist reference documents should mirror that pitch. Engineers at a Silicon Valley startup attach accelerometers to employee heads, measuring cervical angles as screens tilt. They conclude 22.2 degrees yields minimum micro-nod frequency tiny bobs our spines perform to verify presence. The finding leaks into an office furniture catalog where it's rounded to 20, 2 with asterisk hinting at secret decimals. Graphic designers adopt 22 because it echoes the golden ratios breathing room when pages shrink to thumbnail. Sketches. Meanwhile, fountain pen enthusiasts cling to 24, claiming nibs flex better at downhill angles, matching ink's lazy optimism dot in the era of video calls. Ring lights cast gentle threats of glare. Stands for tablets reclaim adjustable racks. Default notches click at 19, 21, 23, 25, as if performing a slow waltz through history's favorite tilts. Wellness influencers film planners on cork stands. Cut to 20 degrees, preaching that writing goals at that incline aligns chakras with calendar weeks. Viewers nod, perhaps because 20 degrees tilts cameras just enough to disguise double chins. Manufacturers capitalize, carving bamboo into wedges etched with laser affirmations angled at 22. Breathe here. Sales graphs incline similarly, modest, pleasing, unlikely to induce alarm. Data scientists, incapable of leaving mysteries ungraphed, compile 6 centuries of angle lore into a scatter plot. Peaks form near 21, 23, a smaller hill at 19 waved by military rations, a stubborn rise at 20 for mid-century schools. They publish a preprint concluding that human necks unconsciously conspire with gravity and paperweight to select slopes that average 22. Commenters propose factors, average elbow height, eyelash length, even the cosine of our patients. None dislodge the restful truth that somewhere between 19 and 24, comfort claims its quiet corridor dot, pick up a book or a tablet now. Rested upon a pillow or folded blanket until pages greet your gaze at a gentle slant, not vertical. Enough to lecture, not flat enough to lull ink into puddles. Maybe your improvised stand leans at 20 degrees, maybe 23 if the blanket bunches. Trace the invisible angle with a lazy finger. Feel it dip and rise like a shallow hill inviting slow ascent. Know that monks, mill owners, typists, and data scientists have all paused upon similar slopes, letting words drift upward without clamor. As your breathing settles, let each exhale match gravity's pull. Each inhale mirror that upward tilt, sustaining margins. Between the quiet fulcrum of spine and the printed horizon before you, sentences will roll gently downhill into memory, then rest, exactly as stands have hoped they would since the first whittled spindle nudged a page toward starlight. You might not expect that the shy sliver of paper left between a punched notebook hole and the pages. Outer edge, the margin moat where nothing is ever written, could draw cabinet makers into measuring chip splinters, entice lighthouse keepers to log wind directions by millimeters, and inspire one brief craze for jasmine-scented reinforcements precisely 6 millimeters wide. Yet here we are, drifting through the unhurried chronicle of hole punch margin. Depth. If you're still awake by the time an Antwerp bookbinder announces that 11 millimeters lets a thought linger without feeling marooned, feel free to subscribe, or simply let your breath settle into those vacant bands. Margins have guarded silence far longer than algorithms have counted listeners. The story opens in an 1880 counting house where ledgers yacht beneath iron paperweights. Clerks bind pages with twine threaded through all pierced holes, set of thumbs. Width from the leaf edge, about 14 millimeters, though no one speaks numbers. They speak thumbs. A Scottish accountant named MacFarlane grows weary of frayed knots and invents a twin-tongued punch inspired by blacksmith tongs. Two still fangs chomp with grim etiquette exactly where string once passed. He guesses at 13 millimeters, because the prototype's jaw seats comfortably on his penknife blade. When sheets rip free under brisk leisure turns, he shifts the bite deeper to 15, then retreats to 14 after complaints about cramped columns. The office sighs collectively, not over the decimals, but over the newfound ease of afternoon page, flipping a luxury that smells faintly of iron filings and tea. Across the channel, a Paris stationer releases a 3-hole punch designed to flirt with metric tidiness. She positions the outermost hole 17 millimeters from the edge, because 17 rhymes with the French for serene. If muttered during siesta, school children praise the sturdiness. Teachers grumble that 7 millimeter ruled margins now end abruptly in a bite mark. To solve the clash, printers shove ruling inward to an even 10, christening the strip a space dame space for the soul. Meanwhile, German engineers, fond of symmetry, draft the DIN A series in the 1920s and decree a 12 millimeter margin for 2-hole punches so binders stack without sulking. 12 pleases some to 4 patterns beloved by typographers. It also matches the width of a standard carpenter's pencil, helpful when assemblers need a quick gauge. Soon, DIN 210 sets 12 as gospel across ledger-laden Europe, though Swiss confectioners, wrapping invoices in chocolate-scented parchment, extend to 13 to fend off cocoa dust. Stateside, companies adopt a 3-ring binder that roars into classrooms like a confident trombone. Patents specify holes 3/8 of an inch, 9.525 millimeters from the edge, partly because early punches inherit gauges from shoelace eyelets. Students adore the nimble flip. Pages seldom tear, but those that do develop half-moon scars locals. Dub paper smiles. Chicago teachers observe that repeated use shortens outer margins to a scoffable scratch. They lobby for 11 millimeters, a figure that matches the thickness of 2 stacked Nichols Handy reference for cash register mines. Manufacturers comply by sliding the punch die 2 sprocket teeth inward. Catalogs hail the change as premium shelf life, though the real benefit is nickels stay in pockets. Rubber reinforcements arrived during World War II, stamped from reclaimed boot solace. The adhesive rings measure 18 millimeters across, so printers push hole margins deeper 15 instead of 14 to keep reinforcements from overhanging like shy life buoys. Desk clerks discover the heavier ring drags pages when breeze, flutters files, They tape the outer edge down with ration starch gum, inadvertently inventing the mended margin. Engineers later develop acetate rings only 16 millimeters wide. Margins slide back to 14, then settle at a median 15 for safety. One micro hook every so often. An Iowa librarian weighs torn sheets and concludes a 15 millimeter. Margin reduces wear by 7 torn outs per 100 circulations, a statistic she annotates with a sleepy smiley. Face no catalog ever reprints. Scene shifts under fluorescent hush of late 1960s data centers. Programmers feed punch card decks where each rectangle's holes huddle firmly 80 columns in. Unbothered by margins, but inspiring office suppliers to standardize. Binder punch depth at exactly half an inch. 12.7 millimeters for 7 whole computer sheets. Rogue manufacturers test 11. Cards buckle, jams ensue, coffee spills, and executives issue memos praising half-inch compatibility. At the same time, high schools embrace loose leaf refills drilled at 13, so ambitious margin. Notes can bloom like ivy. This Goldilocks zone 12 to 13 earns the label college safe, hinting at collegiate seriousness while forgetting doodles of daydream architecture. Spiral notebooks sneak in with perforations hugging. A shy 9mm ledge. When students tear pages loose, spiral fringe phrase, convincing many that deeper margins equal maturity. Plastic comb binding wanders into conference rooms, demanding a grander bite 20 millimeters to satisfy comb spines. Presenters cheer. The stability. Report readers fumble corners too thick to thumb. Within months, comb depth becomes jargon. Secretaries maintain separate hole punches for combs and rings. Some offices place guide stickers on punch bases, red dot at 15 for 3 rings, blue at 20 for combs, a pastel sliver at 12 for continental correspondence. Machinery hums. Nobody bothers decimals unless a jam occurs. Yet decimal. Drama thrives in Japanese stationery shops, where system binders thrive on 11mm offsets, touted as perfect for A5's natural thumb reach. Bloggers measure hand spans, discovering average 4-finger pads land neatly where an 11mm margin ends, igniting brief social media debates on ergonomic destiny before hashtags wander elsewhere. The digital era suggests paper. Might cites final margins, yet ink persists, and with it, whole placements. Cloud notebooks market smart pages, dotted with microcodes. Hole punched at 14, so smartphone cameras crop predictably. Meanwhile, bullet journal aficionados design custom trackers, drilling extra holes 7 millimeters from edge. To dangle tassels. Print-on-demand sites warn margins narrower than 10 risk tassel tyrannies. Eco-friendly bamboo sheets prove stiffer. Punches strain unless hole margins widen to 16. Small batch artisans label the depth, forest buffer, printing leaves along the strip as though explaining itself. ISO committees now list 11 to 13 millimeters as comfortable, 14 to 15 for durability, 16 plus for specialty. A recent white paper notes tear probability rises sharply below 10.7 and plateaus above 14.9, suggesting physics prefers moderation. Yet novelty shops sell executive microbinders drilled at 9 millimeters for agile thinkers. Reviews report pages tearing after 2 brainstorms, but agile thinkers pivot to new notebooks anyway. Proving marketing can outrun cellulose dot hold any binder sheet near you, perhaps wide-ruled from school days, or graph-lined for budgets. Yet unstarted. Measure the distance from edge to first lunar bite of its hold. Maybe 12 millimeters, maybe 15 where caution resides. Trace the margin with a fingertip. Feel its blankness, a corridor where scribbles seldom trespass, but coffee stains love to wander. Inhale slowly, noting how breath pauses between paper edge and perforation, that narrow province of nothingness carved by centuries of thumb estimates, coin wits, and tired machine operators aligning dies at dawn. Exhale as if sending wind. Through that gap, watching fibers flex but remain whole. Again, inhale, exhale, each cycle matching the quiet dimension that lets pages live long enough to be forgotten gracefully. Should slumber tug your own margins inward tonight, may they land like hole punches at just the right depth. Secure, unfussy, numbered perhaps 13 millimeters, or perhaps whatever width the dream requires to keep its leaves turning soundlessly until morning. You might not expect that the unassuming knob at the end of a shoelace, the glut that keeps threads from blooming into dandelion fuzz, could prompt dilds to haggle in half-millimeter whispers that can clockmakers to time knot-tying contests, and spark a modest vogue for peppermint-scented plastic tips molded exactly 27 millimeters long. Yet here we are, drifting through the soft chronicle of a glut-length preference. If you're still awake by the time a Copenhagen cobbler insists that 24 millimeters carry just enough promise of reliability without grandstanding, feel free to subscribe or simply let your laces rest. A glaze have guarded, frayed ends long before applause became a metric. The story begins in a late medieval cordwainer's loft, where candle smoke sketches halos above spools of flax. Apprentices twist cords from linen soaked in beeswax, then wrap the ends with stiff parchment, sealing each tiny sleeve over a warm brazier's side. Measuring sticks don't stray far, but they measure only boots. Nobody counts parchment length. Later studies will reveal those wrappers average 19 millimeters, a length chosen because it fits neatly between two nail marks on the master's workbench. Records hint at fewer calluses on customers' fingertips, yet parchment tears. Under rain, and shoelaces weep into embroidery. A Flemish mercer suggests dipping ends in melted resin, adding 2 millimeters to ensure fingers avoid sticky edges. Thus, the first intentional glut length, 21 millimeters, slips into ledgers and quietly multiplies. Across the channel, Elizabethan courtiers lace doublets with ribbons tipped in silver. Silversmiths, fond of symmetric fractions, cast. Tips 1 inch long, 25.4 millimeters. Pages admire the gleam. Scribes lament the cost. Tailors shorten tips to 7/8 of an inch to save coin, producing a gentle 22.2. Court gossip claims shorter. Tips feel sprightly. A micro hook drifts by. A jester wagers that anyone tying a bow with a glaze under 20 beats the hourglass by a heartbeat. Nobody verifies, but the rumor swells. Meanwhile, Puritan merchants, weary of shine, adopt tinned copper glaze trimmed to 3/4, 19, calling excess the devil's flourish. Their laces fray sooner, yet sermons applaud restraint, proving numerics sometimes kneel before doctrine. Industrial looms take the stage in the 19th century, spinning cotton laces by miles. Wire-drawn metal tubes slide over ends. Stamping. Dice shear tips to 24 millimeters because the cutting disc advances exactly 1 inch each cycle, and the machine must allow a drop of waste. Advertisements tout standard uglies sturdy enough for factory boots. Soldiers marching in Crimea discover 24 holds knots under sleet, and quartermasters scribble requisitions specifying 24 millimeters approved, yet children's. Shoemakers complain the tips poke ankles when laces are tied into stubby bows. Toy makers respond by trimming kid-size glaze to 16, forging the first size-graded sets, 16 for toddlers, 22 for scholars, 24 for infantry and fathers. Packaging prints silhouettes of growing feet, each aligned with its sanctioned glut length like botanical drawings of evolving trust. Rubberized. Plastic dips into vats after 1940, birthing celluloid caps hugging cords like shy helmets. Chemists. Notice plastic shrinks 2 millimeters upon cooling. Molds are cast at 27, so cooled tips land near 25, echoing Victorian legacy. Sneakers boom post-war, and sports coach's time lapse starts by flicking laces. They discover long aglaze whip against calves. Laboratory technicians test drag in wind tunnels, the tunnels actually built for bicycle speeds, but appropriated with enthusiasm. Graphs prove tips over 26 at negligible milliseconds, yet invite annoyance perception. Manufacturers shave length to 23 on running shoes, embossing logos in relief. Runners lace faster, report fewer thigh taps, and neglect economics settle. Dress laces keep 25 for confidence. Sport laces claim 23 for agility. Scene shifts to fluorescent calm of 1980s sneaker boutiques, where neon laces arrive tipped in heat shrink tubing cut to 20. Skateboard culture trims further, 18 for lace locks to tuck into side panels. One Venice Beach skater shortens all the glaze to 10, melting ends with a lighter. The fad briefly names itself the micro tick, but melted blobs chew. Eyelets and fade away. In design studios, minimalist stylists experiment with hollow glass glaze, exactly 30, praising their pendulum swing. They clink pleasantly, but shatter on sidewalks like brittle punctuation, so 30 retreats into collector curios. Meanwhile, patent offices record crimped metal tips, cradling built-in spring hooks, measuring precisely 21. They launch, then vanish, leaving only diagrams where springs forever coil in restful theory. The 2000s usher in woven polyester laces whose coarse strands resist unraveling even without caps. Marketers still add a glaze, now molded from recycled water bottles infused with peppermint oil. The aroma claims to last 200 ties and requires 27 millimeters to maintain diffuser geometry. Yoga influencers adore the freshness. Hikers complain bears follow the scent with puzzling courtesy. Bearwear brands trim peppermint tips to 19, noticing scent evaporates before campsites bloom. Tech firms, flirting with office slides instead of stairs, introduce friction light glaze at 18 to glide through eyelets like polite data packets. Engineers publish internal memos correlating lower incident of lace jams with tip diameter rather than length. Nevertheless, HR orders 18 for the entire campus because decimals rarely inspire swag. ISO committees, watching quietly, propose a friendly range. 18 millimeters to 26 millimeters suits 95% of civilian footwear. They hint at 2 decimal sub-ranges, 18 to 20 for sport, 22 to 25 for formal, 26 for work boots. A Swiss footwear symposium votes for a tidy 23 millimeters median, citing golden ratio nonsense that everyone politely applauds. Still, Italian cobblers continue hand-cutting 21.5 from brass tube because their guillotine's stop block is filed. At that mark, a Japanese shoelace artisan pursuing wabi-sabi varies tips intentionally, 20 on left lace, 23 on right, so tasks begin slightly asymmetrical, encouraging mindfulness. Blog reviewers measure and declare the idea feels like walking beside a gentle stream that never sings the same note twice. Today, 3D printers extrude a glaze shaped like dragon heads, cameras, or tiny kettlebells. Apps allow users to select length in millimeters. Default remains 24 because code repositories borrow constants from Victorian specs. Some daring choose 31. Their laces flop like over-friendly ribbons. Others go micro-minimal at 14, discovering not slit unless double-looped. And somewhere a small lab prints biodegradable caps dissolved by rain after 2,000 steps. Until then, they remain a polite 22, because compost cares little for decimals, but plenty for predictable molding parameters. Lift your own shoe, if you like, and cradle the aglet. Feel its plastic, metal, or wax thread. Perhaps it measures 23 millimeters, the length trenches once blessed. Maybe 20, eager for sprint lanes. Maybe 26, heavy with decades of marching songs. Trace its cylinder width. A fingertip? since the weld line where mold halves once kissed. That tidy stave is a monument to threads refusing chaos, to thumbs craving something to pinch at dawn when shoes yawn open for errands. Breathe in, counting heartbeats along its length. 1, 2, maybe 3 if breath lingers. Exhale, letting. Frayed worries imagine themselves dipped in resin, trimmed to decimals, held tight by patient polymers. Again, in steady and out sure. Soon mind's laces will tie themselves, bows settling just so, a glaze glinting in lamplight before night folds over like a shoebox lid. Wherever dreams wander, their edges will not unravel. Each stray fiber now sleeps inside a measured sleeve, neither too long to flap, nor too short to grasp, exactly the quiet span history found forgiving. Oh, might not expect that the gentle arc of a binder clip handle, the tidy curve squeezed between forefinger and thumb before spring. Steel size open could attract clockmakers with angle gauges, inspire railway clerks to weigh invoices by twang, and kindle one short flourish of rose-scented rubber grips molded exactly 29 millimeters from tip to coil. Yet here we are, gliding through the unhurried chronicle of binder clip handle geometry. If you're still awake by the time a Zurich accountant murmurs that a 64-degree handle invites obedience without sounding officious, feel free to subscribe or simply let the clip rest closed. Handles have rehearsed patience. Since the first ledger pages begged for tidy embrace, the tale begins in a 1910 Boston print shop, where galley proofs slump beneath brass weights. A tinkerer named Samuel Warren cleans scrap piano wire, bends 2 levers around a black spring still mouth, and guesses at an opening angle roughly 60 degrees, because that is how far his wrist flexes without complaint. Early testers pinch and release over type columns, pronouncing the curve agreeably firm, but thin ledgers slip free. Samuel adds 2 millimeters of lift, nudging the handles to 62 degrees, just enough leverage to widen jaws a whisper. More, print boys applaud, less for numbers than for the newfound ease of transferring proofs between trays without scattering paragraphs like startled geese. Across the Atlantic, a London stationer commissions nickel-plated clones. His machinist, seduced by symmetry, files handles to an exact 65 degrees, matching the V of a drafter's set square already cluttering the bench. Clerks adore the bright finish, but note that stiffer angle prize fingers tired by carbon copy. Carbons. Enter the rubber sleeve. Blue tubing snipped from fountain pen sacks slides over handle ends, adding comfort and a millimeter of bulk, which paradoxically reduces needed spread to 63 degrees, physics yielding to fingertips. Accountants dubbed this compromised 3-penny pinch after its marginal upcharge, and so 63 degrees strolls quietly into office routine, neither measured nor contested for a decade. Steam whistles fade into motor hums in factories. Refined clips and chrome baths. Assembly jigs stamp wire levers 9 at a time. Each jig pivots on dowels drilled with a protractor set at exactly 64 degrees because the plant foreman once read that pure sine curves sing truest near that. Value. No one examines the source. They merely like the phrase, sign of composure, painted on crate lids. One micro hook drifts by. A typist counts how many squeezes before spring fatigue. Murmurs surrender, she records 5,000 at 64 degrees, 4,000 at 66, and files her findings in a folder held, of course, by a 64-degree clip. Quality managers print the sheet and declare victory, unaware they have spawned the very evidence of their boast. War-era steel rationing slims wire. Handles droop under thinner gauge, sagging to 61 degrees during squeeze. Engineers, armed with log tables and coffee, debate whether adding gusset bends will restore strength or merely bruise knuckles. They lengthen lever arms instead, allowing same force at 10% gentler curvature, returning spread to 62 but stretching handle tips 2 millimeters outward. Soldiers stuffing field orders into leather portfolios report fewer paper cuts, inadvertently validating ergonomic spreadsheets, drawn months later in distant laboratories where words like dorsal comfort appear above doodles of sleepy thumbs dot post-war. Prosperity polishes everything. Plastic coatings bloom in pastel mint, peach, Dev gray molded thicker toward the bend, reducing finger pressure and sneaking angles up to 65 again. Marketing leaflets dub the curve Executive Confidence, featuring silhouettes. Gripping fountain pens at identical arcs. Librarians, however, complain the stiffer handles snap shut too briskly, flinging catalog cards like startled moths. Manufacturers quietly shave 2 degrees, yet keep brochures unchanged. Nobody measures at the circulation desk. And confidence, once advertised, apparently persists by suggestion alone. Scene 3 drifts beneath fluorescent calm of 1980s. Copiers jammed with memos aspiring to permanence. Secretaries armed with staplers and angst rediscover binder clips for thick project binders. They twist handles backward to fashion improvised standing flaps. Those flaps perform best when original handles splay at 63 degrees. Any broader and reverse fold stands wobble. Office supply journals publish diagrams showing optimal pivot, recommending 63 plus minus 1. Factories oblige though, 1 Taiwanese. Lime retools at 64 due to legacy molds and global drawers soon hum with near identical arcs. A fellowship of mild steel shaped like poised cat whiskers dot digital tablets threaten paper's reign, but cannot pinch lunch receipts, so clips survive, evolving Instagram personas. Craft bloggers paint handles gold, noting paint thickens wire by a hair, subtly trimming spread to 62. Stationary influencers declare 62 the mindful. Hold, and attach suede tassels weighting ends deeper still. A Scandinavian brand prints calm aphorisms along handles. Breathe, simplify, and finds ink adhesion perfect at 63, where tension balances crispness, confirming yet again the angle's stubborn talent for harmony. Environmental. Designers introduce recycled bicycle spokes, their temper requiring slightly larger bend radius, resulting in 61.5 degrees. Packaging explains the decimal as Earth's axial tilt plus a generous nod, though astronomers protest the math. Still, eco shops sell out, proving decimals soothe shoppers when paired with leaf icons. Meanwhile, engineers at a Japanese robotics firm program clip-loading arms. Sensors misread anything past 64, so procurement standardizes at 63, citing robotics synergy. Internal memos note 0 jams since adoption. The anecdote migrates into trade shows where 63 becomes buzz, though one recalls the librarian's earlier plea. ISO committees, ever patient, propose acceptable handle divergence. 60 minus 66 shall be serviceable, 62 minus 64 preferred. Draft notes mention historic resilience near 63, but final text omits romance. A Swiss Materials lab graphs spring constant versus angle, revealing a gentle bowl with minimum fatigue around 63.2. They publish in a journal lost behind subscription walls. Nevertheless, the curve finds its way into slide decks that animate dots settling into sleepy valleys that pick up any binder clip nearby black jaws, folded like polite bats. Squeeze a handle. Feel the arc welcome your fingertips. Perhaps you measure 62, perhaps 64 if coating thickened under summer humidity. Trace the curve's top with a thumb pad. Imagine the century of guesses, gauges, gussets, and gospels that nudge this bend to comfort. Inhale along the upward sweep. Exhale as the lever bows inward, jaws parting with a soft metallic promise. Again, inhale. Exhale breath mirroring tempered steel yielding. then closing, holding pages as gently as dreams hold fragments of noon conversation. Soon the clip will stop framing numbers and start framing silence, its handles poised at their practiced angle, ready to cradle tomorrow's paragraphs after tonight's thoughts have unpinned themselves and drifted, paper light, into rest.